In 1984, the Hasbro Toy Company would license a series of mecha robot toys from Japan and adapt them for Western distribution under a new name, such as the Diaclones from Takara in one instance, or the Variable Fighters from Macross in another. This new brand would be called the Transformers, and as was per usual with the 80s, they had to have their own tie-in cartoon series to go along with it. Originally, the TV show was just a 3-episode long short series made purely to sell the toys, but the ensuing explosion of popularity resulted in 4 seasons of the show and many numerous series and toy lines for decades to come afterwards, solidifying it as an undeniable staple of pop culture ever since. I've always had a little bit of imposter syndrome when it comes to being a Transformers fan because, admittedly, I'm not old enough to have watched the original series when it was on TV. I remember seeing commercials for the RID toys, but the first series I actually had a chance to watch was 2003's Armada. After Armada's initial run, its sequel series, Transformers Energon, would start broadcasting, but in a different time slot, and I wasn't able to keep up with the episodes, and my small child brain just lost interest. That was until 2007, when the first live-action Michael Bay film came out and reignited my interest. This film's release also coincided with the boom of YouTube's popularity, and people making Transformers content on the platform found their audience. Their audience being me, of course. As a 14-year-old with nothing better to do, I went down the rabbit hole and became obsessed, watching YouTubers discuss series I was too young to have watched, comics I was too young to have read, and toys that hadn't been sold in years.
Huge, rounded chests with these silly little arms and these silly little legs and this stupid head.
It was at this point I discovered that my nostalgia series, Armada, was not well regarded in the fan base. Lots of people took issue with the character designs, the gimmicky nature of the mini-cons, comparing them unfavorably to Headmasters and Target Masters from previous series, saying things like, oh, instead of a small robot just transforming into a weapon they can use, they just strap a little car onto their arm and become twice as powerful. Admittedly, the show hasn't aged very well, and lots of animation shortcuts and inconsistencies are present all throughout the series. But the older I got, and the more conversations I listened to from Transformers fans and different perspectives I absorbed, the more I started to realize that Transformers, even down to its very concept, is fundamentally very silly. There's mediocrity to be found no matter where you look throughout this franchise, and it's not exactly known for deep and compelling stories, which is why people really latch on to the characters that are really well written, like Armada, Starscream, or Beast Wars Dinobot. As much as the purists defend G1, the premise of the average episode is undeniably silly. The 1986 movie, widely regarded as one of the best things the franchise has going for it, has a really weak third act that really kills the pacing of it up until the climax. I absolutely love this movie, though. It's a pivotal piece of 80s media, and it might as well be a sing-along as far as I'm concerned with all the cheesy hair metal it has in its soundtrack. Then there's Beast Wars, which is widely regarded as having some of the best storytelling in the franchise, but it has a bit of a flawed premise. The moment you, as a giant robot, decide to transform into a massive gorilla or a dinosaur instead of a truck or a plane, you're not really in disguise anymore, are you? Kind of the antithesis of the concept. Not to mention, I'm so sorry to say this, but Beast Wars animation has aged so poorly, I am almost shocked and embarrassed this aired on broadcast television. It's almost embarrassing to look at. G1 has aged better in terms of visuals. Bottom line, when you get into a niche nerd fan base like this, you're going to encounter a lot of very hard-to-please hyperfans that are either going to nitpick every single little aspect or unjustly put other aspects on a pedestal. In the end, it's best to just accept that the series is kind of mediocre, and it's, at the end of the day, a cartoon meant to sell toys. That doesn't mean don't engage with it intellectually, it just means it's not making any promises it doesn't intend to keep. Like all fan bases on the internet as well, it's always best to just enjoy what you enjoy, reject a gatekeeping mindset, and agree to disagree on your preferences. That being said, Transformers undoubtedly has one form of media with some true hidden gems of high objective quality, and that happens to be video games. In chronological order, there's the Commodore 64 game and the Famicom Mystery of Convoy game you're probably already familiar with from the Angry Video Game Nerd.
Whew, man,
That was the hardest game I've ever beat.
Then there's a couple of Beast Wars games on the PS1 and Tatakai on the PS2, but I'll be leaving my friend Caleb over at Flashing Blades to talk about these. Ironically, Armada might be the TV series to have the best video game adaptation. Once we get through today's topic, I would love to take you guys through all of the major Transformers video games from this game up until 2015's Devastation. We have the movie tie-in games, which range in quality, the excellent War for Cybertron and its even better sequel, and the amazing Transformers Devastation. But for today, this is Transformers Armada on the PS2, and this is the Transformers video game retrospective. The game simply called Transformers was released for the PS2 in 2004, while the Armada TV series was reaching its conclusion and Energon was on its way. Apparently the working title for this game was going to be Prelude to Energon, but it seems like that subtitle was dropped at some point in development. The game comes to us from Studio Melbourne House, formerly Beam Software, who has an impressively long list of games under their belt, but none of any real critical acclaim. They seem to specialize in licensed games, Game Boy ports, and SNES ports of PC games. The game starts just as the anime does, with the Autobots and Decepticons at war on Cybertron. The war basically stuck at a standstill until the Minicons leave the planet and crash land on Earth, causing both factions to send a team after them to acquire their power and turn the tide of the war. You can play as the three Autobots from the beginning of the series, Hotshot, Red Alert, and Optimus Prime. No unlockable Autobots from later in the series, and no Decepticon mode in this game. There are a few stat differences between the three characters, but basically all you need to know is that Hotshot is the fastest, Red Alert's alt mode is the best on rough terrain, and Prime is the toughest. The problem is, as you collect Minicons throughout the game, they start taking up energy slots, and you can only equip Minicons of the energy value within the limit of your chosen character. Prime is the only one of the three to have a max energy limit, meaning the second half of the game you're pretty much stuck playing as him and only him, because all the Minicon loadouts worth using will only be accessible to him. But we'll get to that as soon as we start discussing Minicons. Gary Chalk reprises his role as Optimus Prime, as he had been playing the role ever since Beast Wars and would continue to do so until Peter Cullen will return for the live-action film. Likewise, David Kaye continues to voice Megatron, who you might recognize if you haven't seen the series as Sashomaru from Inuyasha and Clank from Ratchet & Clank. I really can't think of two diametrically opposed robots than he and Megatron. The rest of the voice cast from the show did not elect to provide their voices for the game. In fact, Red Alert is voiced by Darren Norris, who you've no doubt heard in dozens of cartoons, anime, and video games.
Commander, our sensors detect a strong energon signal at the summit of that mountain.
You don't seem to understand the situation you're in. You are yesterday's news.
Hey! You could describe this game as a third-person action game, but not like one you've ever played before. It has the lock strafe camera of a shooter, which works well for combat, but shares little to no other features commonplace in shooters. The controls are interesting, with X only being used to interact with save points. Circle lets you enter a first-person aiming mode, which can be useful with certain weapons. Triangle is to transform into your alt mode, which is always a difficult mechanic to nail down in Transformers games because your alt mode needs to be useful without the game forcing you into your alt mode with gimmicky gameplay. In this game, it's mostly used for mobility and speed, but it's not required for most of the game. Minicon abilities are bound to the shoulder buttons, with the permanently bound jump and shoot bound to L1 and R1 respectively. So depending on what type of Minicon you pick up, will determine what slot you combine it to. If it's a primary weapon, secondary weapon, or some kind of passive ability like armor or a speed booster. Minicons also come in different colors, and by creating a Minicon team of the same color, you can get additional bonuses such as increased maximum health and faster Minicon recharge rate, meaning this game doesn't use ammo for your weapons. The last thing I think I need to mention before we begin is the difficulty. So, this game has 3 difficulties, the easiest of which was still notoriously difficult back in the day. And you would think that things would just get naturally harder with tougher enemies and higher enemy aggression on the higher difficulties, which is true, but the final difficulty, Commander Mode, adds an additional twist. Not only are the enemies tougher and more aggressive, but the bosses have new gimmicks, and they shuffle the locations of certain Minicons throughout the map, which means Minicon loadouts and setups you're used to from the lower difficulties may not be viable or accessible to you on Commander Mode. In 15 years of having this game, I've never beaten it on Commander Mode, so I think you know what I must do today. In spite of the fact that there are only 4 named Decepticon enemies for us to fight in this game, they give us plenty of fodder in the form of the Decepticlone soldiers. Our first section is a platforming tutorial, followed by our introduction to the light unit enemies. They're quite weak and just serve as something for you to fight while the only weapon you have is the standard blaster, and once you have better weapons, the light units essentially disappear from the game's combat loop altogether, except for unique instances where you can blow up a lot of them at once later in the game. There's a dropship setting down some more guys up ahead in the woods, and if we want to, we're able to zoom in and blow it up with our weapon before it leaves. We pick up our first minicon. Normally on the standard difficulty, this is where you would get the missile launcher, but on commander mode it's just the armor, which is appreciated, but we'll have to be extra careful with the next few encounters while we don't have any good weapons. Over the bridge and off into the woods is Pressure Point, which is a melee booster minicon. Not particularly useful except for gimmick setups, but we have nothing else to equip in that slot, so we might as well take him. When we come up to this temple site, we encounter our first medium unit, the primary enemy we'll be fighting for most of the game. We have to carefully duck in and out of the entrance of the temple so we can clear these guys out and obtain Lock-On, the guided missile launcher. A decent weapon that's very easy to use. This is where we would normally get Safeguard, but their locations were swapped on Commander difficulty. We cross over the waterfall and start heading up the hill, where we need to use our alt mode to gain speed and transform out of it to cross these deep ravines. I go down here to look for the mine launcher, but there's not a minicon here at all on Commander difficulty. Little did I know that the mine launcher and the rocket launcher are available on this map even without the glider wings we get later in the game, but I ended up going to the end of the level without them, not even knowing. At the end of the series of winding ravines, we encounter the spider tank enemy. This thing is badass. It has a super laser weapon that's nearly impossible to dodge, giving you only a split second to react when it crouches down to fire it for you to get behind a rock or something to block the attack. We touch the save point and take our first death here to get our health refilled so we can take it out. Next we climb up the side of the mountain to the end of the level where we encounter Cyclonus. He sends out a heavy unit after us and promptly leaves. This results in a mini-boss fight since we're not equipped to deal with one of these right now. The rocket launcher will be better, but the guided missiles will have to do because we couldn't find the rocket launcher. Look, I was streaming when I recorded this bit, and had I taken the time to look around, I probably would have found it. I just didn't want it to take too long to finish this one level. We have to carefully and delicately back off and let this thing chase us around the arena while chipping away at its health. If we get out in the open, it can use rockets on us, and if we get too close to it, it can use a ground pound stomp attack and send us flying, dealing heavy damage. Eventually we win the war of attrition and acquire our signature minicon companions for each character. Funny enough, in the anime, the name of Megatron's minicon companion is Leader 1, which is a reference to the GoBots, which were a rival transforming toy brand when the Transformers were new. So the fact that Megatron has him enslaved as his little companion is kind of a little subtle jab at the GoBots there, which is pretty funny. Now that we have the minicon companions, we can use the square button to enter Power Links mode, a mode that gives us bullet time but drains our health. It very rarely comes up, and maybe if I practice with it, it would end up being totally broken, but I usually just end up forgetting I even have it. Now on to the Antarctic level, which ramps up the difficulty significantly and introduces a lot of new gimmicks. Right away, we encounter a new drone enemy, which if it spots you or spots another enemy being destroyed, it will send up a distress flare for other enemies to arrive. There's really no good way to avoid them altogether, but the homing missile from Lock-On can take them out in one shot without alerting them, unless there's another one nearby to notice. After clearing them out, we have to platform across a frozen river, but the water is shallow enough to where it doesn't instantly kill us like usual, and we can try again if we fail. Once we reach the top of this hill, we can see out into the vast tundra that is this level. There are several points of interest, including a crashed plane, an icebreaker ship, and a research base, all of which is surrounded by enemies. From the starting point, you can attempt to take out as many of the drones as possible with your missile launcher, but many of them will be out of reach. I feel like that one of the intended ways for you to traverse this level is to wind through the trenches, engaging medium units as they appear, but screw that, we're staying on top, which can be dangerous, but I know the layout well enough to not aggro more enemies that I can handle, I think. It's possible to get two of these dropships to collide with each other on their way to deliver their troops, but I couldn't get it to happen on this playthrough. After slowly sneaking my way around, I eventually transform and make a beeline for the tanker ship to get the minicon on top of it. There'll be a lot of encounters on Commander mode where you may just decide to blow past enemies because they're either too tough or the health they drop doesn't evenly exchange with the amount of damage you took to kill them, so it becomes not even worth it. But if you haul ass to the next save point, you've irrevocably made progress in the level regardless. We plow down these guys with our truck mode and pick up Spark Jump, a new primary weapon that is an arc beam gun. Often regarded as the worst primary weapon in the game, it's still better than our standard blaster, and the lightning arc at least allows us to hit enemies instantly, which can be useful for faster and harder to hit enemies like our upcoming boss. Next we transform and roll out over to the crashed cargo plane and acquire Watchdog, the Limpet Mines. They attach to enemies and blow up when shot. A little jank to use, but makes a powerful combo with Spark Jump. They can also cause smaller enemies to panic and flee when one is stuck to them. We arrive at the research base and is absolutely dense with enemies. You may have to grab the save point here and take a death or two to recover your health, and allow the game to save some of your progress with killing the enemies in the area. There are several minicons and datacons within the complex, so you'll have to destroy all of the buildings and find them, but destroying 2 or 3 of the buildings will usually spawn in the boss for this map. In the hangar we find Lookout, the sniper rifle. A very powerful secondary weapon that is actually required for a fight later in the game, but won't be too useful for us right now. One of the smaller buildings has Hawkeye Energon vision, which lets us see enemies through walls or when obscured by weather. It's gimmicky, but has a low energy rating, so we might as well equip it for now. In the center we find Comeback, which gives us a one-time use full health refill upon death. It's very powerful, but naturally has a high energy rating of 4 bars. Now this is interesting because this minicon is normally located on a patch of ice out in the lake that you need the glider wings to get to, which is a minicon you get a few levels later. Meaning, on lower difficulties, this minicon is normally not accessible for this boss fight, which means that by giving it to you early, I would argue they actually made this boss a little bit easier on Commander difficulty because we can cheese him with a second life bar. I don't know if that was intended, but it is very funny. The last minicon we get before the boss is High Gear, which offers us a dash ability that unfortunately has a pretty long cooldown. It has its fringe uses later on. Starscream explodes his way out of the complex and threatens to exterminate us, so it's boss time. Starscream is incredibly fast and agile. He usually always rushes at you at first and tries to use his sword on you. While on the ground, he can also use his shoulder blasters, but afterwards he'll transform and fly away and make passes at you with his rockets. There's scarcely few opportunities to hit him while he's in jet mode, so you have to make it count. I take 2 deaths to him and go back out onto the map to see if I miss any minicons, and sure enough I missed Slapshot, the grenade launcher, which is one of my favorite secondary weapons with its silly physics. I return to the main menu and redeploy the research center, which despawns a lot of the enemies. Now we can legitimately try to kill Starscream. On the 5th attempt, I finally beat him. Slapshot ends up being vastly better than Watchdog because you can dump several projectiles on him at once when he's making a pass in jet mode, which is usually enough to send him crashing down to the ground and transforming back into robot mode. Also, the damage is strong enough to briefly stun him while he's walking towards you in robot mode, which helps a lot. Obviously, Starscream wasn't going to go down in just one fight, so we'll see him again later. We now have to return to the Amazon to deal with Cyclonus, but not just the Amazon, the deep Amazon. You also may notice here in these first 3 levels that the color doesn't look quite right and the footage is a little bit janky. That's because the footage from the first 3 levels comes from a live stream I did to showcase this game to some friends, and I was using a pretty jank recording setup to convert AV cables to HDMI, so the later levels will not look like that because they were recorded properly. Normally at the start of this level you would get the Burst Fire Blaster Skirmish, which combos great with Slapshot as they're both red minicons, but there's nothing at this location at all in Commander mode, so we're forced to deal with this heavy unit and his squad using Spark Jump still. There's a unique enemy in this level that's an artillery unit. It launches mortars at you until you get close to it, and then it deploys a shield. I cross the bridge, and instead of heading for the temple, I haul ass into the woods looking for minicons that could help me, only to take a death. So then I decide I really need Deflector for this level, especially for the Cyclonus fight, so I go ahead and backtrack to the first Amazon level and find it just off the side of the giant waterfall we crossed. It is really a shame I didn't find that sooner. We return to the deep Amazon and back into the woods, where we finally find Airburst, the Flak Cannon, That's interesting. So normally this minicon is located at the top of the temple, and if you try to pick it up, you trigger the Cyclonus fight. Which means not only do we get it early, but we have an opportunity to use the only weapon that is super effective against flying enemies against a boss that's almost constantly in the air. I'm excited about this. We meet the most asshole enemy in the game here. Holy shit, I hate these things. The commando units. They're like these gorilla-shaped robots that can pick you up and slam you back down, but their ranged attack is an EMP blast that drains all your minicon energy, meaning you can't shoot them back, so you really have to do your best to not get hit by that. Now, it's normally a terrible idea to leave the artillery units alive because they'll just continue to shell you from the ground as you climb up the temple, but you may have to make a run for the save point to the temple to at least secure your progress. The temple itself is so dark I can barely see where I'm going. I really wish I had skirmish right now. After fighting through what has to be the closest quarters encounter in the entire game, you find the center of the temple where another save point is, but there are a few adjacent rooms with more minicons. We find Knockdown, which is an EMP burst similar to the ones the commandos use against us. It's gimmicky and costs a lot, and we'll almost never use it. We also find Rangefinder, which does exactly what you think, increasing the range of all of our weapons. There are a few weapons this can be useful with, but we typically don't go for it. By the save point, we finally find Skirmish and say goodbye to Spark Jump. Then we head back to base to equip Airburst, and we're ready for the Cyclonus fight. We take the elevator, yes, the elevator, in an ancient Aztec temple, and find Cyclonus at the top. The very first thing we do is immediately hop back down the temple to the ground level, undoing all the effort we spent climbing up here. If we don't do this, Cyclonus will pick us up and throw us off, and I really don't want to land in the river. The majority of the fight he spends in his helicopter mode trying to engage us directly with his machine guns and missiles. He's pretty easy to hit with Skirmish, and Airburst deals some really good damage, being that he's airborne. Almost like changing the locations of the minicons on Commander difficulty ended up working out in our favor. Deflector is mandatory for this for blocking his machine gun fire, but nothing quite as broken as Reactivation. Again, we're not supposed to be able to get this until acquiring the glider wings at the beginning of the next level, which means there's 2 bosses we can easily cheese by abusing this thing early. He could potentially transform back into his robot mode and run you down with a dash move. By the time we had to use our reactivation, he was only at about a third of his health, so he never got a chance to do that before he was defeated, and crashes into the one-of-a-kind ancient sacred megalithic historical site. Our next level has us going out into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to destroy a Decepticon battleship. Yes, we are in the middle of the ocean, but there are a few rocks and a sand barge for us to walk on, which seems like it'd be very bad for ships in the area. Like they would easily just get stuck on this or crash if they're not paying attention. This level has a ton of new enemies, starting with upgraded medium units that carry handheld shields. These guys are hard to hit without explosive weapons, and they can throw their own offhand grenades at you. I'm stuck on Airburst right now because, for one, I didn't change my setup yet, and 2, I still need it for another new enemy type we're going to be encountering soon. Watchdog or Slapshot would be great against these guys, though. At the top of the hill, we encounter the jetpack units, which are a pain in the ass to hit, but Airburst essentially kills them instantly as they fall to the ground and explode on impact. We finally get Slipstream, the glider wings, which allows us to backtrack to the previous 3 levels and acquire the minicons we're missing. The mechanics with Slipstreams are interesting because you can only glide where there's wind available. If the game doesn't want you to be able to just randomly take off and fly, there won't be any wind to give you any lift. In the Amazon, I start off at the top of the hill where we ended the level, and it's definitely a good idea to try to use Lookout to snipe this heavy unit on top of the giant rock before we fly over there, as his ground pound can knock you off, leaving you to start all over again. So this might be as good a time as any to address the elephant in the room. This game was made in 2004. You know what was really popular back then? Ragdoll physics. Anyway, eventually we get past this guy and get Hailstorm. We couldn't find the regular rocket launcher, but we get the heavy cluster rockets instead, which are the most powerful secondary weapon in the game. The next little hill right across from you has another Minicon hidden in the trees. This one is the tractor beam, and it's hilarious. It's not very good, but it is very funny, as you can launch small enemies off the sides of cliffs to their death. One of my favorites in the game. I restart back at the top of the hill to get a good view, and I spot a little guy lurking in the grass. Man, if I had known this was here, I actually could have gotten it on our first run through at the beginning of the game. I really wish the Minicons and Datacons were lit up in different colors though, that would make this a lot easier. This is Claymore, who normally is on the road in a little alcove off to the side on normal difficulty. You can drop down an absolute mess of proximity mines with this guy before you have to recharge it, but it's very short range. Finally, we need to glide onto one of the two drop ships circling the map and wait until they get close to this island over here. Glide over here and we get Firefight, the super heavy blaster. This basically power creeps skirmish immediately, and the next primary weapon we get after that as well. It can rapid fire heavy projectiles, but can also be charged up like the power beam in Metroid. This thing will wreck your trigger finger as well, since you have to completely let go of the button for it to fire instead of trying to build up a charge shot. In Antarctica, yes, it's pronounced Antarctica, don't forget the first C, we use the glider wings to fly over to a patch of ice where reactivation is normally located. This time around is another totally broken Minicon called Build Up, which gradually heals you over time. We would love to use this more often, but we have to have Slipstream in that same slot for most of the game. There's an ice plateau nearby back on the tundra as well, and if we glide over to it we can find Smackdown, the super melee booster. You could combine this with the regular melee booster to be able to knock around small enemies with ease, but you won't get very far with this setup, especially on this difficulty. Back in the deep Amazon, if we select the Atom Chamber save point, we can take the historically accurate giant robot elevator to the top and glide to the waterfall at the back of the temple. This is where we get Covert, the stealth field. I really want to try this thing out more, I just don't feel like it will last long enough to allow us to completely avoid aggroing enemies, but it's really cool that it's there. Also from the top of the temple you can glide over to this dropship and land on top of it, and pick up Twister, which is a tornado launcher. It's a 4-bar Minicon that basically and instantly kills small enemies, but is completely ineffective against larger ones. That's the problem with a lot of the secondary weapons in this game, is you need answers to a lot of these tougher enemies, especially on this difficulty, so some of these weapons are just reserved for screwing around in the post-game, but I gotta give them credit for creativity. The variety of weapons in this game is top-notch. Don't jump off the ship quite yet, ride that sucker to the end of the lake and glide over to this other island. This is where we pick up a mediocre Blizzard game. It's an impact gun that disperses into smaller projectiles. It's a lot of fun, but basically already power crept by Firefight unless you're going for an all-blue Minicon team specifically. Now that we've backtracked all the previous levels and gotten all the Minicons we missed, we're ready for the Mid-Atlantic and the difficulty spike it represents. Our loadout is now Firefight and Hailstorm with Deflector as well. We glide across to the other island and we're able to glide across to the ship itself. As soon as we arrive on deck, we encounter a huge group of light units, which we can hilariously blow away, showing off our new weapons and just how much the game has abandoned them as viable enemies. The jetpack units are a pain in the ass to hit with Firefight, but at least they only really move side to side rather than up and down. We take the elevator down into the hangar bay and start winding our way through the various hallways of the ship. The ship is symmetrical on both sides, so you technically have two ways to the bridge, and they're both packed with enemies. The biggest thing you need to worry about in these close quarters is the grenades thrown by the shield units. They're very hard to see, and you can easily miss the audio cue if you're not paying attention. More great news. The commandos are here too, and for your first time through the game, you're probably going to get thrown to the ground by them over and over again. We finally get to an elevator that leads to the second level deck, where we encounter a new enemy type. A command unit. These guys are crazy. They can shoot rockets at you, they have a sword attack that is very difficult to dodge, and they can also give commands to light and medium units, which we'll see in greater detail later. When we get to the bridge, we'll reveal the truth that this battleship is in fact another Decepticon itself. This is Tidal Wave, the Titan-class / city-based Decepticon for Armada, similar to Trypticon or Scorponok from G1, and he's the toughest boss in the game. We need to immediately go take a death here in order to return to base and adjust our setup. We absolutely must have lookout for this fight, as it's the only way we can damage him. We've also got Deflector and Build Up, since we don't need the glider wings for the fight itself. I'm switching over to Red Alert for this, for the added speed and armor, since I don't care about having the point loss and our primary weapon is basically not needed for this fight. Or so I thought. This boss fight is a delicate balance of getting far enough away from him where you're not at risk from his ship guns, but not too far away where you can't hit him in the head with a sniper rifle. His most powerful attack is his artillery launchers that he can send devastating mortars down to you, but they're easy to avoid. But his most dangerous attack by far is the pinpoint laser on his head. This thing can drain your health from full to empty very quickly if you allow it to hit you, so it's usually a good idea to transform and get the hell out of there as soon as he starts using it. The only problem is when he gets to the last third of his health, he'll deploy the laser for a much longer period of time and more frequently than he would earlier in the fight, meaning a perfect run where you're still high on health could go really wrong towards the end. But thankfully Deflector can block the laser, but only as long as it has energy to last. His head is the only part of him you can damage. You can hit him at a variety of angles, but after a few subsequent shots, he'll raise his hand to block you, which is probably your cue to drive away and let Lookout recharge. All was going well in this run until he revealed a gimmick unique to Commander difficulty that I didn't know about and was not prepared for. When he gets to the last third of his health, he deploys a group of jetpack units to fight you. The extra enemies all shooting at you at the same time is a huge problem, and I had to improvise with this bog standard blaster, which thankfully was enough to take them down. This battle always gave me a hard time as a kid, even on the regular difficulty, and finally beating him on Commander difficulty after all these years was quite a triumphant feeling. So apparently Tidal Wave had the coordinates to Megatron's base, so we're going to Alaska of all places. I actually kind of like that this game takes place in the middle of the wilderness, and we're never around any major human civilizations. I just think that's kind of a nice setting for a Transformers game. I'm back on Slipstream, and I'm going to be showing off Overwatch for a little bit of this level. We're also on Hailstorm, and we're going to get to see the kind of insanity that this cluster of rockets does to the enemy's physics. These rockets are powerful enough to blow up gravity itself, it seems. We quickly run into a new enemy type, Shield Arms. They're not as tough as they look, but they have a rapid-fire blaster that can do a lot of damage. Deflector is a must for dealing with them. You can also only hit them in the center of their body, since their limbs are shielded, but I would rather deal with these guys than the medium units with the handheld shields. Our main route is north into the mountain pass, but over to the right we can find some minicons before we go that way. Right off the bat we run into a large group of enemies being led by a command unit. I think now is a good time to mention as well that the AI in this game is really, really good. Like, you've probably noticed by now that medium units can, like, duck and dodge out of the way of rockets and missiles. The commander unit can block with his sword and give orders to medium units to have them, like, form a formation with their shields and lob grenades at you. It's really complex stuff for 2004, especially with such a small team. After that encounter, we find another blue minicon to replace Overwatch. Aurora is a heavy ribbon beam that can attach itself to enemies and can be chained to multiple targets. It's a great way to get around the shielded enemies and does the most consistent damage out of anything we have right now. You don't really have to aim it, really. At the top of this really tall hill, we find the Datacon, and we can glide across to this island in the middle of the lake and pick up Bulletproof, who has heavy armor. We haven't really had an opportunity to use the armor minicons in this run because we've been occupying those slots with minicons that actively do things rather than passive ones. Back on land, we decide to become an ice road trucker and blow past these enemies up to the save point past the lake. Not really worth the time to fight them. There's a couple of different ways you can approach the mountain pass here, such as taking the high road and the low road where you're bound to get ambushed, but once again I just decided to run over everything in my way until I reached the save point at the end of the canyon. Now we have to climb up some ledges and find a narrow opening in the canyon itself to progress. This narrow path leads to a large clearing where you can pick up high jump, the high jump. Parts of this level, as well as certain minicons in previous levels, require us to have this minicon equipped over Slipstream. It lets us jump higher if the name wasn't obvious enough. Absolute meat grinder of an encounter in this clearing. It's a real endurance test. Several command units, each with their own squad of shield units, a dropship delivering more guys, a spider tank, and 2 heavy units to come out of the mountain cave where our next objective is. I took 3 deaths to this counter alone. Who designed this? Dario Casali? I had to swap over to build up and really take my time dealing with these guys. And once I made it to the cave, I was able to swap back over to high jump at the save point. In doing so, I have an opportunity to backtrack to Antarctica and pick up this minicon that's only accessible with high jump. Shock Punch creates a force field around you that damages enemies on contact. It's not very useful. This cave is pretty dark and difficult to know where you're going, but at least it's short. Thankfully there's a save point at the top because it's a long way back down. Okay, so there was a command unit, and I didn't want to get knocked off the cliff by his sword, but I remembered that these rockets can break the laws of gravity, and, well, you've already seen the clip. At the top of the cliff, you get Kickback, which is a super powerful 360-degree deflector shield that can deflect projectiles and melee, and is quite useful, but not for the amount of power it costs. Then we go for a minicon further up and trigger a cutscene, where Starscream has returned with an entire starship to fight us with.
There's no escape!
So this idiot decided the best way to deal with us with his massive starship, probably covered in weapons on all sides, full of soldiers, is to crash the thing violently into the ground, permanently immobilizing it for good. It didn't even work. We just jumped out of the way like it was effortless.
You're an idiot, Starscream!
Now we have an opportunity to infiltrate his starship and take out his extremely disoriented and disorganized soldiers at our own pace. Lots of shield arms and drones in here, which makes for a pretty tough firefight right out of the gate. The combat here is at its best, but it's still really brutal. Luckily there isn't enough room in these hallways for spider tanks or heavy units. Yet. On the second floor, an elevator comes down with a command unit. If you're close enough, you can blast his squad with the quad rockets before they even have a chance to do anything, which is nice, but the command units are such a pain in the ass in close quarters. Although I feel like I've said that about most enemies. On the second floor, there are also some glass ceilings that have been broken out thanks to Starscream crashing the ship like an idiot. You can just dump some rockets down on the enemies below you before you have to jump down and fight them. Eventually you work your way to some door switches, and oh god, I lied about the heavy units. They fit one in here somehow with some commando units because they actively want the player to suffer in this level. The next door has 2 cloaked command units. I just want to kick Starscream's ass and be done with this. Speaking of which, we've finally reached the bridge, and the elevator stops halfway up deliberately because they need to make sure the player has high jump equipped before the next sequence. You'll see. On the bridge awaits Aftershock, the super heavy cannon, one of the strongest primary weapons in the game, and we'll have to equip it and show it off later, unfortunately. Now that the ship has nosedived into the ice, this level reveals its true gimmick. You now have a platforming section with no enemies where you have to backtrack through the ship with everything turned on its side. It is absolutely brilliant how they laid this out, and it still looks believable at both angles from an artistic and stylistic perspective. Once we work our way back up to the back of the ship, we can jump out the side, grab a save point and a few datacons, and we're ready to take on Starscream. Starscream 2 is really when I felt the Commander Mode challenge really start to set in and live up to its reputation. He is much harder than his first form and has a lot of new tricks. He follows a similar pattern where he transforms and does flybys at you, but usually spends a lot more time in robot mode than before. He can leap into the air and fire his shoulder cannons at you. My initial setup was Aftershock and Airburst with build-up as well, but build-up wasn't doing the job, so I swapped back over to Aurora and Hailstorm and ditched Deflector altogether for this fight to get reactivation again. Aurora lets me consistently damage him even without having to aim directly at him, useful for hitting him in jet mode, and Hailstorm lets me blow his ass out of the air, which ended up being one of the only ways to prevent him from firing his cannons at me, until he just decides he can dash to the side in the air and avoid my rockets. The only method I found effective for avoiding it was walking towards him to get under him so he can't angle his cannons down that far, but even that only worked some of the time. I want you guys to see how close this was. Look at this bullshit. Barely a hit left and he gets the kill first. Now you're probably expecting me to make some kind of FromSoft comparison to emphasize the difficulty here, and sure, I guess. I love the Armored Core games. It took probably about 7 or 8 tries before I finally got him.
This is the end, Starscream. I want Megatron.
Get in line.
Where is he?
Find him yourself.
Hack his warp transponder.
Yes, sir.
Pretty badass of Prime to just be like, you know what, if you're not going to talk, I'm going to get what I want out of you one way or another. Turns out that Megatron's base was on a tropical island in the Pacific Ocean this whole time. For the first part of this map, I need to be on lookout to deal with the jet snipers. Technically a new enemy, but you could have encountered them sooner if you backtracked to the Arctic. They're extremely annoying if you end up in their sights, but Lookout not only deals with them, but also deals with the command units roaming around on the beach. We also have turrets on this map, and they can take an enormous amount of damage to destroy, but oftentimes you can just destroy the operator and leave the turrets alone. Climb up this hill and glide over to the mountain across from you. Once I landed, I decided this definitely was one of the encounters where it wasn't worth it to try to fight all these guys, because they have these weird dug-in underground bases that launch additional enemies out of them, so I just ran to the save point to secure my progress. You can destroy the base entrances to avoid having to fight more enemies coming out of them, or you can enter them and destroy all the enemies from within, which results in obtaining a datacon and destroying the base that way. I'll show off one of these and just skip the rest. I'm finally back on Aftershock, which behaves just like an upgraded firefight. It has the whole rapid trigger thing you can do, and you can charge it up. The shots have an arc and a decaying trajectory, which can sometimes make things hard to hit at a distance, but the fact that each projectile has splash damage means you can stun a lot of small enemies in addition to just doing crazy amounts of damage. It's great. I love it. Solid weapon. We have to climb up this waterfall with turrets all around it. You can easily blow them up with Aftershock before you even get down here if you choose to. Right now I'm not on Slipstream, so I can have Hailstorm equipped as well, but I'll have to switch back to him very soon. You can operate these turrets too, which seems like an afterthought that may have been cut from previous levels, since it's implemented here in the final level and there are almost no instances where you can actually kill any enemies with it. We head down this ridge into a similar plateau area with more underground bases, and the physics being the way it is, this happened. I'm not goofing off here, I was legitimately stuck. Red Alert tells us about a nearby human settlement with a powerful minicon, so time to use Slipstream and glide over there. High gear gives us a nice little boost to get over here, and we pick up full speed, the double boost. Great for getting more momentum while flying, but still doesn't allow you to fly where the game doesn't intend for you to go. This can't be the powerful minicon, there has to be something else here. Aftershock ends up being great for taking out these jetpack units because one hit will stun them and cause them to fall out of the air. there's an absolute mess of enemies coming out of the human settlement, including a command unit and his squad, and 2 heavy units. Once we take them out, we blow up some of these buildings and find Failsafe. Failsafe is to the guided missile what Hailstorm is to the rocket launcher. Hailstorm might overall be more powerful, but having a weapon this accurate and reliable on this kind of a power scale is nice. Not the Megatron killer that Red Alert made it out to be, but we'll take it. Absolutely miserable encounter as we climb up this dry riverbed. Jet snipers on all sides. You can tell when they're about to take a shot when their laser sight changes from red to pink and gets brighter. Failsafe ends up being pretty good at taking them out, but getting close enough for it to lock onto them is difficult. We pick up the save point at the top, and we can blow past these drop ships pretty easily now with Aftershock, and sometimes the splash damage hits the enemies on the inside of the ship as well. Glide your way over to the volcano, and get your setup ready for Megatron.
Come, Autobot. Let's finish it.
After 15 years, this is it. The final crucible to decide if I can beat this ball-bustingly hard game on its hardest difficulty. Megatron does not fuck around, and has the most devious gimmick added for this difficulty level in the entire game. Almost like the developers knew what wasn't balanced about their game and actively prevented you from exploiting it on the hardest difficulty. So here's the dilemma with the Megatron fight. The arena is down inside the volcano crater, which means you either need to gently glide into it with Slipstream, which takes up one of your valuable slots, or you take half your health and falling damage just getting into the arena. On lower difficulties, you can circumvent this problem with build-up, as you can crash land at the bottom of the crater and wait for your health to come back. But on Commander difficulty, he will equip his own build-up as well to counteract yours, meaning you can't just sit under the arena during the fight and heal up, because he will heal as well, causing the fight to basically just reset. You have to beat him in one go, so I decided Aftershock, Deflector, Reactivation, no secondary weapon. Right at the beginning of the fight, he'll rush you and start shooting you with Leader 1, and if he catches you, he will launch you up into the air and pile drive you back down. He'll also kick you off the arena into the lava when he's done, just to add insult to injury, but thankfully the lava deals minimal damage for some reason. When he transforms into his tank mode is when the real trouble starts, because obviously you have to avoid his main tank cannon, which is very hard to do, but also mortars. After my third death, I decided maybe it was time to try build up after all, and maybe if I had a secondary weapon, the damage could offset his healing if I was aggressive enough, so I picked Slapshot. Not having reactivation was concerning though. I took one more death and finally developed a strategy that was working. Every time he tried to rush me, I would walk back down into one of the ramps on either side of the arena and he would back off. Then you just have to carefully time it to where you can jump back into the arena while he's in tank mode, staying close enough to the edge where it's actually possible to dodge his cannon. Both of our weapons let us deal a ton of damage in small concentrations, and being able to arc the projectiles up from the ramp to hit him in tank mode while he can't hit us was very useful. After finally beating him, I was on top of the world. So are you in for some whiplash? Immediately during the same cutscene that Megatron is defeated, we get a message saying our homeworld Cybertron is under threat of attack from the giant planet-sized cosmic horror Unicron, and we need to recover the last of the minicons in the game and haul ass home to protect it from him. Unicron is one of the most iconic and memorable things about the 1986 movie, and was the final performance of film legend Orson Welles before he passed away.
For a time, you considered sparing your wretched little planet Cybertron. But now, you shall witness its dismemberment.
Unicron always represented to me this existential feeling of inevitability. This all-consuming, unstoppable force that appears as hopelessly big and impossible as the things in our lives we have no control over, such as growing old and the passage of time itself, which the series ended up taking literally later on, as in Transformers Cybertron it's revealed that the black hole created by his spark represents the end of time itself, although the ties to Unicron were most likely added in the American version of that series and not the original Galaxy Force. As iconic as he is, it is strange that the franchise has used him very sparingly over its history, Armada being the first and one of the only times since then to include him in the storyline. So from now on, you'll have a Minicon counter at the top of the screen to show us all the ones we have remaining to collect. I'm pretty sure only required to get all 40 of them on Commander difficulty, with the lower difficulties requiring few of them as mandatory. When we return to the volcano, we see that it's been closed off from the eruption, so we can walk across the hardened surface now. We jump off the back of the volcano and glide around the side of it to find Stronghold, the super armor. Once again, we really don't have room for this guy, but he is the toughest armor in the game. From here I can see a Mini-Kong along the side of a cliff by a previous save point, so we glide over there and pick up Shepard. Similar to Hawkeye, this one only detects Mini-Cons, and we're going to go ahead and use it for our hunt. I lost the footage of me picking up Jumpstart, which is the super heavy arc gun, a nice upgrade to Spark Jump and the most powerful red Mini-Con in the game. From the volcano again, we see another Mini-Con lit up, but I'm fairly certain this is a new location not used to place Mini-Cons on the previous difficulties, so trying to figure out how to get up here was a little difficult. We finally managed to get enough air and land up here to get Corona, the super heavy ribbon beam, an upgrade to Aurora and tied for the most powerful primary weapon in the game. It would have been a consideration to use against Megatron had I known where to get it before the fight. We return to the deep Amazon, and I wasn't sure where to start, so I spawn in at the top of the hill and glide over to the temple. Inside a room that requires high jump, we get Shield Wall, a ballistic shield that deflects melee and missiles. It would have been useful if it wasn't power crept by the super shield we get in Alaska. In the regular Amazon, we use Shepard to finally find Flashbang, the standard rocket launcher that we should have had at the beginning of the game, we just didn't know where they had moved it to. The last one ends up being in Alaska, and had we not sped through the canyon so fast, we would have picked it up. We finally get... This thing lets us scramble the enemies and cause them to attack each other. I don't know how reliable this is, and I should probably experiment with it some more. Now it's finally time for the Unicron fight. He never actually transforms in this game at all, staying in his planet mode for the entire fight. The scale for this whole thing is also hilariously bad, taking us mere seconds to fly halfway across the planet, and Unicron himself not being that much bigger than us, despite being supposedly planet-sized. The Minicons have bestowed us with some new power, including the Matrix Thrusters and a Matrix Blaster. The objective here is actually pretty simple. When Unicron opens his mouth to blast one of these cities to bits, we fly into his mouth and shoot his core with the Matrix Blaster before he can fire. You do this 3 times and he reveals his second phase where you have to go 1 layer deeper to hit his true core. The timing on the second phase is much more tight, but overall it's not very difficult and there's nothing that adds any more challenge to it on Commander difficulty.
Destiny. You cannot destroy my destiny.
Oh, so you're just gonna rip off Orson Welles' last line ever spoken in cinema? Classy.
Till all are one.
So, in terms of flaws with this game, it is a little on the short side. The story is completely inconsequential and doesn't follow the plot of the anime at all. And the Unicron bit at the end is very abrupt and tacked on and just poorly done overall, but other than those things, I really hope I've sold you guys on this game. I would say even if you're not a Transformers fan, this game is an underrated PS2 classic. Now, it is rare. I don't see many copies of it in the wild. In fact, this one took several years to get. Found it in 2007 at a place called Crazy Game Trader for $12. That's why I left the sticker on there. That store closed down shortly after this, so it's a little piece of history for me personally. But the game's secondhand market value has remained stable around $15 even during the pandemic. And that's $15 well spent, because this game has a lot more fun and polish than modern games that cost $60. Well, that was a lot of fun, but we've got to get through a couple of mediocre movie tie-in games before we can get to another hidden gem. Until next time.
The party's just started.